Good evening, Brown community, and everyone else tuning in today from wherever in the world you may be. It is my enormous honor to welcome you to the 10th in our series of Brown Fashion Week Talks, which are being broadcast live from the campus of Brown University here in beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. I'm Sasha Pinto, the president of Fashion at Brown, which is the student organization hosting Brown Fashion Week. We are Brown's oldest incubator of style on campus, with over 130 members in 11 departments, ranging from fashion designers to editorial, business, and more. The highlight of our year, of course, is Brown Fashion Week, and this year we have a particularly spectacular lineup of 15 speaker events spanning the course of 2 weeks, culminating with our design team's incredible runway show. And today we are exceedingly honored to welcome 3 of the leading fashion editors in the country, Samantha Barry, Vanessa Friedman, and Chioma Nnadi. And to tell you more about them, I am delighted to turn the Zoom mic over to Fashion Brown's co-vice presidents, Emma Rosenkranz and Celia Heath. So Celia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sasha. I am so delighted to tell everyone about Miss Vanessa Friedman, who was named the fashion director and chief fashion critic for the New York Times in March 2014. In this role, she leads global fashion coverage for both the New York Times and International New York Times on all platforms. Before joining the paper, beginning in 2003, Ms. Friedman was the inaugural fashion editor of the Financial Times. Along with editing the style pages and a luxury 360 vertical, she wrote a weekly column for the Financial Times and created their annual Business of Luxury conference. Previously, she was the fashion features director for InStyle UK, a fashion correspondent for the Financial Times, an arts contributor at The Economist, and the European editor at American Elle. In addition, she contributed regularly to Vogue, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, and Entertainment Weekly. She is the author of Emilio Pucci, as well as an honorary professor at Glasgow Caledonian University. She was the recipient of the 2012 Front Page Award for Fashion Writing, as well as the 2013 Fashion Monitor Journalist of the Year Award. Wow. So suffice it to say, Ms. Friedman has established herself as a leader in fashion journalism. She provides some of the most influential social commentary on the fashion industry and its relationship to art, culture, politics, and beyond. And now, Emma, over to you to tell us about Samantha Berry.
Thank you, Celia. Samantha Berry is the editor-in-chief of Glamour, where she manages the magazine's reporting and content from digital to print and oversees consumer experiences across the brand's digital, social, video, and print verticals. Under her leadership, Glamour emphasizes a digital-first focus on original reporting, exclusive features, and unique perspectives impacting women today across financial, interpersonal, fashion, beauty, wellness, and political topics. She's also strengthened Glamour's commitment to body positivity by showcasing size-inclusive brands and models across all channels. Prior to joining Glamour, Berry served as the executive producer for social and emerging media at CNN Worldwide, spearheading the organization's 2016 election coverage, receiving the first ever Edward R. Murrow Award for Excellence in Social Media. Not to mention, under her leadership at CNN, the network became the most followed and fanned news organization in the world. Berry has transformed the annual Glamour Women of the Year Awards into an inspirational, multi-day event celebrating Glamour's diverse community of women through a series of rewarding experiences, empowering panels, discussions, and keynotes. So, Berry is remarkable. She is truly a thought-provoking, strong voice in fashion today. And Sasha, back to you.
Thank you, Emma. And I have the honor of introducing Chioma Nnadi, who is the editor of Vogue.com. Chioma began her career on the features desk of the Evening Standard magazine in London before moving to New York to write for Trace, an independent style magazine. She then went on to work as the style director at Fader, covering fashion through the lens of music. In 2010, Chioma joined Vogue magazine as a fashion writer, and 4 years later took on a role as the fashion news director for Vogue.com, where she worked on the relaunch of the site and oversaw the fashion news team. And her tenure as fashion news director led to Chioma's appointment to the top spot as the editor at Vogue.com last September, heading up all of the magazine's digital content. And in an email written by Anna Wintour to the Vogue staff, Anna said that, quote, she absolutely relies on Chioma's eye, cosmopolitanism, and taste, and that Chioma is someone who intuitively understands that Vogue needs to reach new audiences in new ways, respecting Vogue's iconic past but not being tied to old traditions. And I can't resist mentioning that Anna also called Chioma one of the best dressed editors at Fashion Week. Oh my goodness. So with that, it is our enormous privilege to welcome these remarkable editors to the Zoom stage, Ms. Chioma Nnadi, Ms. Vanessa Friedman, and Ms. Samantha Berry. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Brown Fashion Week.
Hi, thank you.
And let me just start by saying how fortunate we feel to have all of you here, since coordinating 3 busy schedules is no mean feat. So thank you for your generosity in joining us. And you're all in New York, right? How's the city faring these days?
Feels like it's coming back to life a little bit. Sun's coming out. We got over the snowy part of it, and yeah, it feels like it's slowly getting back to life.
Yeah. Well, last week, Fashion Brown spoke to Sarah Jessica Parker, and she told us that she was cautiously optimistic about the city. So hopefully we are rounding the corner. But let me introduce you to the student moderator today. Liza Mullett is a junior here at Brown, studying English and International and Public Affairs. In addition to being a Fashion Brown industry programming coordinator, Liza is a senior staff writer at the Brown Daily Herald and spent last semester covering the 2020 presidential election. She also enjoys writing about fashion, music, and film and their relation to politics. How interesting. So with that, let's say hello to Liza Mullett.
Hi, Sasha. Thank you so much for such a warm introduction. I'm so thrilled and so honored to be here. And it's so exciting to meet you all, albeit virtually. I know the Brown community, including myself, we're all so grateful that you were able to join us for Brown Fashion Week. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. So now that we are all here, the 3 of us will sign off and we'll leave you to get started. So bye for now, everyone.
Great. So we can just get started. It's so wonderful to meet you all again. So I know you mentioned to Sasha that you're all in New York at the moment. So I'm curious, have you been able to get into the office at all recently, or have you been mostly remote?
I've been to the office twice since last March, and each time I think I was like the only person in the whole building. I thought, why am I here? We're opening up again officially September 7th.
Right in time for Fashion Week. So exciting. What about you, Chioma? Have you been able to get into the Vogue offices?
I went back for the first time in must have been over a year. Well, almost a year. I went back on Tuesday, and it was quite surreal. I've kind of like, it was very confusing figuring out what to wear to the empty office because I'm still wearing sweatpants right now, full disclosure. So yeah, so it was kind of nice to sort of think about being part of an office again, but also kind of daunting. Like I just have my muscle memory for what to wear to work is completely disintegrated.
Well, I'm sure you looked stylish no matter what, even in your sweatpants. What about you, Samantha? Have you been able to get into the Glamour offices?
Yeah, I just started going back. So we're in Condé Nast as well with Vogue and in World Trade Center in New York. And some of us has just started going back in. I have in the last few days, very much on a voluntary basis, and I can walk to work. So I think it's easier and more comfortable. Some people aren't comfortable getting on the subway at the moment. So yeah, it's a bit spooky because the offices are so quiet. But for me, I needed to get out of my apartment and just get away from these 4 walls. And I also needed the demarcation between the start of the day and the end of the workday, not to be just a glass of wine, because that's the only thing that was like making the difference when I was in the apartment by myself. But now it's like I leave the office and I go home.
Yeah, it's good to get some structure back in there. So I don't know, I feel like I'm so curious, since fashion is such a visual and physical medium of expression and art, what has kind of the virtual experience been like as a fashion editor during this time? I mean, obviously the day-to-day has changed, but Vanessa, could you tell me a little bit about how your day-to-day has changed given the remote nature? I feel like everything has changed, but
I mean, I think my life is somewhat different. You know, all 3 of us have a slightly different routine and different exigencies. I mean, I think it sucks. Like, I hate not being able to go out and talk to people and see people and like look at their environments and you know, like pick up all the cues that you use in that way. You know, it's like, it's incredibly frustrating to be engaging with everything through a screen or on a phone. You know, that said, there's still like a huge amount of stuff happening, and you know, I don't know about Sam and Chioma, but like for me, when everything locked down, I had all these people calling me and saying, oh, so you're like, your life is going to be really nice now because you can't go to shows and there really isn't that much fashion, right? And I was like, you know, so like my summer was pandemic and bankruptcies and obituaries and then social justice. I mean, like, you know, everything is actually a fashion story. So, and everything doesn't stop just because shows stop. So it's been a kind of crazy, weird year.
Absolutely. And Chioma, obviously you're the editor of Vogue.com, so your work is very digital forward. So I don't know, what has that shift been like, obviously, since your work is so digital heavy already?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a real adjustment for everybody, you know, I just can't imagine anyone who hasn't had to sort of make some sort of adjustment in this moment. And I do think, as much as, you know, I work in a digital space, like it's difficult ideating in a digital space. I think that, you know, the spontaneity of being able to sort of walk over to my colleagues and be like, hey, what do you think of this idea? Or just kind of take in the world around me and how people are dressing, and kind of take the temperature of New York, even, you know, beyond the fashion world, is like a real hindrance. But it's been interesting to see, like, you know, sort of, you know, all the solutions that we've been able to come up with, all the sort of creative problem solving that goes on, and how much you can do remotely. And I think that we see that also in the way brands are reacting and adjusting. And I think, you know, it's been kind of a moment where everything stands still, and as Vanessa says, nothing stands still. So you sort of have this feeling that of urgency always, because it does feel like so much is changing in the world around us. But then obviously, like, you're stuck with one screen, so it's a kind of a jarring experience. But one I think that I've definitely learned from. But yeah, definitely eager to get back into the world, to get back into the real world.
Absolutely. You kind of spoken about this a little bit, but I feel like fashion and fashion journalism has already been shifting so much, even before the pandemic hit. So I don't know, Samantha, could you maybe speak to some of the changes in fashion journalism that you have seen before the pandemic has struck? And I don't know how you see the fashion world shifting in our shifting socio-political world.
I feel just to what the other women were saying, there's kind of two things that I've seen happen in the last 12 months. One is, it is very hard at home on these constant Zoom calls to have that serendipity of creativity, right? Meeting somebody at a fashion show where they kind of tell you a story, and it gets your mind rolling on a potential feature and something you should be covering, or, you know, getting the team together and going, what do we think about this, in a very organic way, and not a forced, here's 30 minutes of a Zoom call that we have scheduled to talk about this. And I think that's one of the things that we are missing out on. But then on the flip side, what has been lovely to watch is how resilient creative people can be. And what I mean by that is, we just had our Demi Lovato cover that came out last Tuesday. And usually with those big covers, you know, there's a lot of people on set. I would go, and there'd be, you know, there'd be lots of people that are there. We did it with a very small number of people. I was on Zoom, kind of like trying to get the photographer to get Demi up on a wall via Zoom is harder to do than when you do it in person with the publicist. It's been interesting to see, you know, Vanity Fair have done drone shots, and, you know, some of the creativity in the world of fashion, especially when it comes to fashion shoots, which are such a big part of publishing in the magazine industry, how people have worked around that. And whether that's the concept covers you've seen, or whether that is, you know, you've even seen also a lot of like celebrities doing self shoots this year, right? Which I think something in the publishing world would have kind of shied away from, but because we needed, in the necessity of putting out an issue or a digital cover, more creative people felt, I think, more open to changing the rules a little bit this year.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I feel like I definitely have seen a lot of those self shoots or face FaceTime shoots all over social media. I find it so interesting how people are able to adapt. So I don't know, obviously the fashion industry has begun to shift to social media and to online mediums even before we've been forced to go virtual. We've seen kind of the advent of like the Instagram model and the growth of fast fashion accumulating over as it gets more exposure on Instagram and other platforms, as well as other more positive changes like the advancement of racial and bodily diversity. So fashion seems to be more accessible than ever. So I don't know, everything is in the palm of our hands. Do you think, obviously it's not just black or white, but I don't know, do you see this as a good or bad thing for the future of fashion? Chioma, maybe if you could speak to this question a little bit.
Yeah, I think of it as a, I think the sort of democratization of fashion is always good. And I think, on a very sort of like simple level, like, yes, social media has helped that happen and has expedited that. And I think, I think the fact that even when you think about the big shows, the Dior's, the Chanel's, I think they're very much, when they're creating these shows, and this is before the pandemic, they were thinking about how they were speaking to a larger audience. I think now, you see these brands and they're thinking about like the content that they're creating beyond, that moment that a few, very select people get to enjoy. So I do think that, and technology's really helped with that. We weren't able to sort of have that front row experience before, and now, I'm sitting at my kitchen table enjoying a show in the same way that anyone else is, which must be, very frustrating if you're, having to write a critique about it like Vanessa does. So I think there is something that you lose also. You don't have that visceral experience, you don't have that immersive experience of being there. So I think as we think beyond this moment about what will happen and about, where we'll go with the technology that we have and the fact that we have social media, the pandemic has kind of put that under a microscope, because now we rely much more heavily on these tools to think about communicating fashion ideas and fashion messages. And yeah, so I don't know if I've answered the question. I've drifted off, but
no,
yeah.
you definitely have answered the question. It's a great answer. Samantha, I was wondering if you could kind of piggyback off of that a little bit. Obviously, your work at CNN in social media was award-winning and really innovative. So I don't know, how do you kind of translate your social media work at CNN into your work now, which is more fashion-focused at Glamour?
I think it's interesting. So my career is not obviously in fashion journalism at all. I did a master's in journalism and I worked in newsrooms my whole career. I worked in RTÉ, which is the Irish broadcaster, BBC as a television producer, and then coming to CNN. But I think the thread that threads through all of that is the ability to storytell, and whether that storytelling is in fashion or beauty or culture or health and wellness. For me, it was taking on this brand, right? Glamour's been around since 1939. It's got this amazing history, and it was original tagline in the 40s was "for the girl with the job," which at the time was so progressive, and it had an amazing editor for many a decade. If you haven't read about Ruth Whitney, I recommend you do, because she was such an inspiration. But for me, I took over at Glamour when it was a time of change for them, right? Print wasn't necessarily working anymore for Glamour, but the brand and the title had so much power and energy and history that I wanted to move it into social and video and audio. And, we're a lot of stuff we're doing this year, we're doing like long form documentaries with Billie Jean King, or we've grown our audio brand across, different series. And I think all of the work that I had done in newsrooms, in TV, and I started in radio because I love audio. So I'm really interested in this surge of audio that's happening at the moment. But taking that to a brand like Glamour, which is steeped in fashion and beauty, and moving it on from print storytelling was important to me. But I think, I think everybody's come to that realization, including fashion brands this year, that their digital storytelling is more important than ever. Their access, we've grown a massive commerce business at Glamour, and the ability to buy with a very easy user experience. I think some of the fashion brands have understood in the times of COVID how important that is. But also I think this year there's been a reckoning of what is the purpose with your profit. What are you standing for? what do you I think Gen Zers are much more conscious consumers than maybe other generations, and they want to know what your brand, and whether that's a beauty brand or a fashion brand, what you stand for and what you stand against. And I think that's become more important and kind of more under the spotlight in the last, 12 months. And I know Vanessa has written a lot about that. And I think that intersection of what fashion and culture looks like is much more important today than it was even a couple of years ago.
Absolutely. And Vanessa, I was just going to turn it to you. Thank you, Samantha, for that perfect transition. Obviously, the New York Times is one of the biggest news publications in the world. What is it like serving as a fashion director at such a renowned publication that isn't necessarily centered around fashion, obviously has become such a major voice and presence in fashion journalism under your leadership? But I don't know, how do you, given the fact that it's such a news-centered, news-forward organization, how do you kind of incorporate that social, political aspect into your writing about fashion?
I mean, I generally think of fashion as a reflection of identity, right, and communication and politics at any moment in time. And what's so nice about it is that it's a universal arm of that. Like there are three subjects everyone cares about, right? They care about food, they care about also what they put in their body, they care about shelter, where they put their body, and they care about clothing, which is what they put on their body. So it's one of the few kind of languages that I think we all share. And that makes it this incredibly useful prism to look at all these other questions, that touch on anything else the Times is doing. So, almost every time we're in a news meeting and someone is talking about, what happened that morning, I am thinking, okay, like, where's my slice of that? Where's our slice of that? And, to me, that's the job, that's the role we play, is to, situate these decisions that all of us make every day about how we're, what we're saying to the rest of the world about ourselves through our clothing, mm-hmm. in the nexus of all this other stuff that is happening that we're all experiencing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I don't know, have the topics that you're writing about changed during the pandemic? Does writing about fashion and couture ever feel, I don't know, inappropriate in a time of economic crisis and struggle? Obviously, it's such a difficult moment for so many financially and health-wise. So I don't know, has that impacted the way you write about fashion?
I think it's this, you have to address those questions head on, but you also have to remind people that, these are businesses that employ, many people in all sorts of different areas, not just in their workrooms, but, they employ florists, and they employ messengers, and they employ, garment workers around the world. And all of that is, important. They have like a fiduciary duty to people's livelihoods. So when we're in a situation like the one we're in now, that we're coming out of, when, people's businesses are really challenged, that has this huge kind of knock-on effect that matters to everybody. So it's wrong to kind of view, I think, expensive clothing as this kind of frivolous expression of, self-indulgence that's only available, that only means something to a very, very small amount of people. I think it has symbolic meaning, it has storytelling meaning, as Sam said, and it's got, real kind of business implications.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Kind of on that same business end, we're considering the financial aspect of fashion journalism. How do you all see fashion publications managing to remain successful, remain relevant with this kind of gradual disappearance of print? So if people can access content on the internet without having to physically purchase a magazine or newspaper, how do you think fashion publications will continue to be produced? Obviously, Chioma, you're the head of Vogue.com, which is a huge aspect of Vogue's publication. So if you could maybe answer that question.
Sure. I do think, it's like, to me, when I think about storytelling, and there's always different ways of telling a story, and the kind of stories that we can tell online, we necessarily wouldn't tell in print. There is something to having those timeless images in, shot by, the sort of best photographers in the world, and these moments and these collectible things. It's like vinyl. Like, people still buy records. They didn't stop because we can access everything on the internet, and the kind of stories that that I might tell on the internet aren't the same as what we would say in print. And it's the same it's not just about print versus digital. There are so many different platforms now. You sort of have to find people where they are, you know, and they're not necessarily logging onto a homepage, that's for sure. You know, they're getting their news on Twitter, they're going on TikTok, they're going, you know, they're looking at Instagram. So it's like the where and how we tell the stories changes from platform to platform. So I just think of it as like, well, how, like, there are different tentacles of this brand and of this storytelling like operation, and you're able to sort of reach people in different ways, and you sort of figure out, well, what's the best story to tell here, or how would I tell this story on this medium, you know, and that's kind of how we're thinking about storytelling and fashion and how we communicate fashion, I think, now.
Yeah, absolutely. Samantha, could you maybe speak to that a little bit? Obviously, under your leadership, Glamour has kind of shifted and has become even more innovative in the way it presents content. So if you could maybe speak to that as well.
I think when you're thinking about it as like a leader, the most important thing is like in publishing, in media, is how you're diversifying your revenue, right? Like, how are you taking yourself off the dependence of a declining print, advertising heavy revenue, and how are you moving towards a place where your pie is made up of commerce and consumer revenue and branded content and video, you know, content. And I think that doing all of that while still holding on to what is the important part as an editor is the IP of your brand. And I think, you know, I think there's some places have done it much better than others, right? And I think the ones that have moved away from, again, that dependence on print revenue, I think about all the things that I, you know, the New York Times, I'm going to use as an example. Like, I have a subscription that has digital. I like the print copy at the weekend because I like picking up print at the weekend. I've also bought into the cooking app, the mini crossword. Like, they're getting it from loads of directions from me. And I think, again, that's a smart way that they've diversified where they get money from audience rather than just from advertisers. And I think that's really important for anybody that's looking at the big picture of any type of media company, fashion or otherwise.
Absolutely. You kind of mentioned a little bit about advertisers and streams of revenue. I know that under your leadership, you've garnered a lot of attention and respect for your commitment to celebrating and showing body positivity and size inclusivity at Glamour. So I don't know, did you receive any pushback from advertisers or other executives that are involved in these decisions? So how was this received?
Look, I think it's a really underrepresented part of female fashion in America. And I remember having a lot in my first couple of weeks again, coming from CNN to Condé Nast and having all of these very, you know, strange and fabulous lunches with fashion designers and retailers. And I made a promise in those first couple of weeks, if they extended their sizing, I would give them coverage. And we have had lots of places take us up on that. And I think a lot of them know if they extend their sizes past a size 10, they're going to get guaranteed coverage because we know our audience cares about it. We know that 66% of American women are over a certain size. We know they have a lot of money to spend and they're not necessarily being served in general. It's got better. It still has a long way to go in terms of being served by American fashion is further ahead than Europe, but there's still a way to go. And I think for me, it's brought in, you know, we did our September cover, I think about 2 years ago, and it was all, you know, they're called plus size, which is an interesting term in itself. But we did this whole package on being fat in fashion and how people identify and use that word. But I think for us, it was ultimately, we knew we were representing our audience and we knew we were representing lots of women across America that didn't feel represented in the world of publishing. And I think that doesn't just happen in a silo with one issue and one shoot. Like every time you see a commerce piece from Glamour, it's size inclusive. Every time you see imagery on our homepage, it's size inclusive. Doesn't happen in a silo. We don't put it in a section. It's just part of our DNA now. And I think we've actually got a lot of newer advertisers for that, right? Especially those ones that lean in to extending their sizes.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, that's super interesting. Kind of, obviously you're creating these changes within Glamour, within your organization, but have you have you all seen kind of these changes filter throughout the fashion industry beyond just size inclusivity? But obviously there has been a history of racism within fashion. So have you seen over the past few years any kind of widespread change within this kind of realm, fashion progressing forward?
Just for me?
Oh, anyone who would like to answer is welcome to.
I mean, we just did a big study of Black representation in particular in high fashion, so in runway fashion, designer-led runway fashion. We looked at 64 different brands in the 4 major capitals, so New York, Milan, London, Paris. And, you know, it was, I mean, the information that's available is a complete mess. There's actually very little of it. There's almost no transparency. The brands are completely freaked out at any question on this subject. They are very uncomfortable about it. You know, you see movement in the places that are easiest to see movement. So literally, you know, in image making. So in, you know, in magazine covers, I mean, both, you know, Vogue and Glamour have been really active in this front. You know, in ad campaigns, on runways, you know, where I think genuinely there is a kind of understanding of diversity on multiple levels, but you do not see it at all in the power structure of, you know, established fashion brands, the ones that like make the most money, have the most influencers, and reach the most people. And, you know, and until, I think, you know, until they understand the actual picture in their own companies and are willing to kind of be transparent about it in a very vulnerable way, which is, you know, both things they hate. Like, you know, fashion does not like transparency. It does not like vulnerability. It does not like opening itself up. It is, you know, all about mystique and the velvet rope and the like thing they can create in front of them. You know, but until that happens, you can't actually ever understand if things are changing. You know, so it's not that you need numbers to, you know, call people out or tell them they suck or throw mud at them, which is what they're all afraid of. But you need it to understand where you are and where you can get to. You know, and until fashion starts to grapple with that idea, you know, I do not have a lot of faith in it.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Conversation is still in its infancy. Like, I think it's something that, you know, maybe in the past 2 years, I think when we talked about diversity and inclusion in fashion, you know, particularly with regards to race, it was, as Vanessa's saying, it was about, you know, who was in front of the camera. It was very much about like, how can we visibly show to the world that we're being inclusive? But we know that inclusivity means, you know, who gets to be in the boardroom, like who's making the big decisions, and you're never going to get truly kind of diverse perspectives if you don't have them, you know, at the very seat of power. So those conversations are still happening in fashion, and I think yeah, I mean, I found that the report to be so fascinating, because I think it's going to take, you know, just to sort of incubate the talent, you know, to find the talent, identify. I think, you know, there's this rush to sort of like hire, you know, people in certain positions. And I think if you haven't done the work of incubating the talent, then that is it's gonna just take a lot longer to sort of course correct and to get it right. You know, and so like the companies that are doing the work, like I really applaud them, but I think it's a very few, you know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you kind of talked about the sense of power dynamics within these structures, and fashion journalism is one of the most important means of bringing fashion and art to the masses, bringing them, whether it's through social media or through print. So it's obviously a big responsibility. So do you feel that responsibility when you write? What do you kind of consider to be the most pressing duty of, I don't know, your position as some of the most important voices in fashion? Whoever would like to answer.
I think there's also like we had a moment during the summer. We did this big issue around the Crown Act, and it was a issue around hair discrimination in America. And we had to write in it that Glamour has not always got that right? Like when we dug into the archives of Glamour, we did not get that right in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And we had to, going into making this package, which was representing not only what was happening around the country with the Crown Act, but we interviewed a lot of women with their stories of hair discrimination. We had a lot of talent to do a YouTube video with the words. We had to upfront be like, let's just hold our hands up and say that Glamour has got this wrong in the past. And I also think that's an important moment of accountability for any publication or any media company, to be like, we haven't got it right. Like sometimes I go into the archives of Glamour and I look at the cover lines they used in the 90s and I'm like, oh my good God, like you would not put that on a cover today. But if you're trying to move on the conversation, you've got to kind of put your hand up and be like, we didn't get it right all the time. We're trying to be different and better and be that, you know, be that storyteller in all of these different stories. And I also think what was important, you know, when we talk to our team at Glamour and the wider, you know, team that work with us, is especially when we're representing diverse stories, that we should also do the ones that have joy and light and laughter and have those types of diverse stories in, and not always the stories of sorrow when we're talking about diversity. And I think that was really important throughout our coverage as well of the Hair Act or the Crown Act, where we did Wash Day Diaries, and it was like behind the curtain. And I think that they're all important tools that we can use as storytellers.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Chioma, what has your experience been like with this at Vogue.com?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've, you know, I guess I've been working at Vogue for 10 years. And so I've seen a lot of change in the industry. I've seen a lot of change in fashion. And for me, you know, where I find I get joy is being able, you know, the way I see the world, I just see the world how I see it, you know, and I think thinking about the stories that matter to me and starting with the stories that I think that matter is how I think about, you know, what I want to say to the world, you know, just from a singular perspective. And that's always been very intuitive to me. So when I'm thinking about bringing other voices in and making room for other people, and when I actually, you know, had the ability to do that, it was just very natural to be able to say, hey, like, what do you think? How do you see the world? You know, and I didn't, it wasn't so much you know, it's never been anything where I'm like, oh, we need to do diversity. I just see the world how I see it, and the things that matter to me, and I see them, and my experience have shaped the way that I think and see the world. And so when you include more people who have different perspectives, then that happens quite naturally, you know. So and I always get joy in sort of showing stories that haven't been told, or elevating voices that maybe weren't heard, you know. But that's not something that I've done in a very kind of like it's very intuitive, you know. And I think that comes from having you know, that just comes from how I see the world. I don't know how to sort of like, you know, put a finger on it specifically. And I think, you know, at Vogue, historically, there weren't always a sort of a diverse set of voices. And so it's been exciting to be there at a moment when that's been really a focal point and that's been a priority. And so to be able to be there at that moment is really exciting, I think, and to see that change, you know. But I guess like people ask me this a lot, you know, like, but really it's something that's always been intuitive to me. And I remember when I went and I worked on a publication in the UK, and I looked around and I was like, I was the only, you know, woman of color working in the building. You know, there were 2 newspapers in this building, and the other person was a guy who I went to college with, another Black guy. So like, that was quite daunting. But you know, and it wasn't a very great experience for me. And I think actually coming to America, where the conversation was more open and has been more open about race, and I think that, you know, we see that in Europe there are still conversations that are kind of in their infancy there around race and about the workplace. And so actually for me coming to America, where it was a little bit more, where that conversation was more open, was much was sort of freeing in a way. And yeah, so I think, you know, making room for people to sort of like you know, tell their story and also like share how they see in the world. And I think for me, like fashion's about perspective, you know, and I think it's been so great to discover young creative voices, you know, and see them grow in the fashion space. Like people like, you know, like 𝐀𝐒𝐈𝐍 Ramon, you know, like for me, it's like seeing him and being him. Like it's about identity, just as Vanessa's saying. And he sees the world in like his experience have shaped the way he sees the world and he sees fashion. And so making room and making sure that we're making room for people, that's how we get there, you know, that's how we make it a more inclusive space. I don't know, is that answering the question? I went
Oh, it answered the question and more. Thank you so much. So kind of considering, obviously you all have such a passion for storytelling and sharing your perspective and the perspective of others. But from what I've read, the three of you didn't necessarily start in fashion journalism, always had a passion for kind of sharing these stories. But I don't know, maybe Vanessa, if you could speak to this a little bit. I remember hearing that your first fashion assignment was writing a story about boots, and then it just kind of went from there. So I don't know, what did you all kind of study in college? What did you think you wanted to be when you grew up? And how did you get here to these amazing positions you have in fashion today?
I studied history in college, history and creative writing. I think I thought I would, at first I thought I'd be a lawyer, and then maybe I thought I would go into writing, but then I would write about like big, important, serious topics like, you know, philosophy or, you know, fine arts or something, or, you know, novels. And so I did that. I fell into glossy magazines, but not writing about fashion, writing mostly about arts or doing editing of arts pieces. You know, I like started at Vanity Fair, went sort of all the way through Condé Nast, and then got married. My husband said, "Do you want to move to England?" We thought, yeah, that'd be fun. We go there, and I found myself like in a loft in Kentish Town, knowing nobody with no job. So I started just randomly sending out freelance pitches and sent one to the FT. A woman saw I had worked at Vogue, assumed that meant I knew about fashion, and assigned me a fashion story. And that's sort of how it happened. It was really all by complete mistake.
So it just kind of happened naturally. So obviously you started out by writing a few, like you said, freelance stories about fashion. How did that kind of transition into a full-blown fashion career?
So I freelanced for about 5 years doing all sorts of very random and totally different things. Had a kid, went to work at InStyle, doing, you know, sort of features, so mostly celebrity stuff. And then the FT decided to have a fashion editor. I just had another baby, was a little bored of InStyle. And honestly, I think I was the only fashion person they remembered. And you know, and I sort of thought it'd be a fun thing to try. You know, I had honestly like never thought I would work at a newspaper, never thought I would focus on fashion, you know, had been incredibly dismissive of fashion, really until I started thinking about it more, which says more about how stupid I was, I think, and myopic I was at the time than anything about fashion. Because it took me a really long time to understand how great a subject it was, that if you were writing about fashion, you were essentially writing about anything. So I could write about all the things I had thought at one point that I wanted to write about, you know, philosophy and sociology and culture and politics and sports, and, you know, like pretty much anything that like went by my vision, I could grab onto.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's so interesting. It's kind of allows you to be a jack of all trades and write about everything you're interested in. Samantha, could you maybe talk about this a little bit as well? Obviously, you did such amazing work at CNN, working in social media and news for so long. So I don't know if you could talk about maybe how you decided to move to Glamour and make that transition.
It's interesting because I always wanted to be in media, but I also broadcast, right? So I did a master's in journalism, and my first job was overnight writing and reading the news and putting it together on radio. And then I worked in my 20s in Papua New Guinea for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. I had this crazy, you know, I was invincible, running around the place thinking I was a, you know, war correspondent for a little while. And then I worked at BBC as a television producer. And then, but I ended up at the time kind of doing a lot of things that were outside of my job description. So setting up the Facebook page and working with the anchors on their social following, just because I was really interested in it, which led me to CNN and running social media there. And it was a very lucky time where we grew the social team. It was in Hong Kong and London and Atlanta and DC, and it was 24/7, and it was amazing. And it was during an election. To be at CNN during an election is a very exciting time. And for me, the move to publishing was very, I have to say, a bit strange, right? Like I'd always been really comfortable, you know, in my career in control rooms, and I'd always been really comfortable with video, and I'd always been comfortable with being on air. But I had this moment, and I had to, you know, I was very honest with my team walking in. Like I didn't come from a fashion or a beauty background, but I did depend on the fashion and the beauty team there to help. But I've told this story before, which was like, I think it was my first week, and I was in Condé Nast, and it was like, somebody said, go, you got to go up. Oh, my assistant was like, you got to go upstairs for a run through. And I just turned around and I was like, what's a run through? And so I had that's not a language I spoke. Like I knew how to put together a TV show. I didn't know what a run through was. And you guys might remember run through very famously in The Devil Wears Prada, where they come in with the 2 different colored, you know, belts. And that's what I walked into. And it was like the stylist and the creative director and the photographer, and there was just racks of clothes. And I was honestly pretty nervous because I was like, this is not my world. I haven't come from this world. And I had to choose the cover, the looks for the April cover, which, you know, the issue itself had been nearly done, but they were shooting the cover. And all these racks of clothes came in, and I didn't know what to ask. So I asked what I would ask in a shop. I was like, how much is that? And all of the fashion team just turned around and were like, what do you mean? They were holding up this dress. And I was like, how much is it? And I asked that question because I knew what the Glamour reader spent on clothes. And I knew how much she would spend on clothes. I knew what her, you know, average wage was. I knew what, you know, designers she liked. And for months afterwards, it's kind of a running joke sometimes in the run-throughs, they used to just come in with post-it notes on every piece of clothes with the price on it, because they knew I was going to ask what the price was. And my first actual issue that I put together was the money issue. And it was because it's a question I ask around fashion, and not because I want people to lean into fast fashion, but because we built a cost per wear calculator for the site, because I wanted people to understand the value of what they were spending in fashion. What, you know, will last you for 5 years. That leather jacket, maybe you should spend a little bit more and have a more reputable company that you're buying it for, with the values that you identify with. But yeah, there was definitely moments, I think in the first year, they're probably still happening, where I had gone from the world of news into the world of like fashion and beauty in Condé, and I was like, oh God, I'm out of my depth here a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the story with the Post-it notes. I think it's a great way to consider what you're putting out there. Chioma, maybe if you could talk a little bit about your experience leading up to your time at Vogue.
Sure. I think I grew up reading a lot of magazines. Like I loved The Face, and my brother was like, you know, my style icon. He was like the coolest guy and loved music, read The Face and Arena. And so and ID. And so I remember reading all of those, but obviously, like, you know, growing up with a, you know, traditional Nigerian father, like he wasn't about to let me go and study fashion, or like, you know, I had to sort of like get a good degree and do the whole thing. So I studied English lit and French lit just because I liked reading. Like I was really, you know, as a kid, I was a real nerd. So I did that. And then I still was like, okay, I'm going to go and intern with a stylist. And so lots of my friends' brothers, my brother is, he edits videos. So he's very much connected with the world of media. So, and he was a little bit older than me. So all of his friends kind of were like, you know, was people I could potentially intern with. So one of his friends was a fashion editor at a magazine, and I can't even remember the name of the magazine. It wasn't a magazine that was particularly one that I was excited about, but I just wanted to get the experience. I was like, I need to be on a fashion shoot. Like that was all I wanted to do. And so I did it for a week, and I was like trapped in the closet for a week, and I was like, this is not for me. Like I can't, like, I'm not interested in this. Like, I don't want to be a stylist. I'm not into lugging bags. Like, this doesn't seem fun. So I sort of like scrapped that idea. And one of my other brother's friends was like, you should come and work with like, you should come and work on features, and like, you should write, like, why not, give it a go. And that was really fun. And not what I expected. It was kind of the workplace wasn't an easy environment, like working on newspapers, even there was a magazine, it was a weekly magazine, it was quite intense environment. And I didn't necessarily feel that I wanted to be there long term. So I ended up getting a job in an indie magazine in New York that suited me a lot better, I think. And it was a really kind of international crew. It was this magazine called Trace, and the editor at the time was really ahead of his time, Claude Gruninsky. He was very much about this idea of transculturalism, this idea that we sort of cross-pollinate all these cultures. And like, being of mixed heritage myself, like, I was really excited to be part of a magazine like that, because it was very difficult for advertisers to pigeonhole us, because they were like, well, do you speak to a Black audience, or do you speak to a white audience, or do you speak to an Asian? And we're like, well, no, actually we speak to everybody, because like, we're actually about this idea that you don't have to sort of fit in any one category. But it was a really, really fun place to work, and there were people from all over the world, because it was very much that attitude. And so my colleague was from Japan, and we all had visas, and it was really a fun place to work. And then I went to work for a music magazine, and none of this was like ever strictly fashion. Like, I don't think I ever went to a fashion show before. I sort of crashed a few when I was at the Fader, because I was like, I had to cover this beat and I liked it, but it wasn't like, they weren't rushing to invite me to the front row when I was at the Fader. But it was cool, I got to see fashion through the lens of music. And for me, I kind of came to fashion through those magazines, but mostly through street style. And when I say street style, I don't mean like who's hanging out at shows, but like really like what people are wearing on the street and what people are wearing in clubs. Like, for me, it was about, the dance music culture of the time. That's how I was introduced to fashion. Like, my first like looks were like getting dressed to go to a club. Like, and that to me was like, that was how I identified with clothes. And like, what Vanessa says about identity really resonates with me, because that's how I built my identity. It was very much, it was all about style tribes in London, and like kind of feeling that you were part of something, and I think as teenagers, like, I just remember being a kid, and I remember seeing Bjork walking down the street with like, she was wearing like the Birkies, the clogs, like the Crocs, the clogs. And I was so obsessed with Bjork, because, everybody like in the late 90s was obsessed with Bjork, and I was just like, I need to buy those. And I remember wearing them to college, and everybody at college thought it was like this weird fashion creature. I'd wear weird stuff. And, and I remember it was all about layering like skirts over pants, and everybody was like, what's going on here? Or, it was fun. Like, it was like how I kind of like, figured out like what I wanted to say to the world. And like, so I think fashion for me was like, not this sort of very like rarefied world. That's not how I sort of interacted with it. And I guess you call it style, like whatever you call it, but like clothes meant something to me. And I felt very like, as a shy kind of bookish girl, they gave me something else, and so, and I think it was kind of nice to come to fashion maybe a little bit older than some of the other writers, or interns or whatever. Like, I was a junior member of staff who'd actually had, been in media for like, I guess I'd been in it for like 10 years at that point. So, a lot of people who come into the fashion journalism, they're very much like of that, you have a certain training, I think, and that not having that training was good for me, because I think I had different interests. Like, there were things that were obviously like obsessed with style, but like other things informed my point of view. So I think that's really a strength. I think if people at like, it's difficult because I can't see everybody that's here, but one thing I would say to people is just like, and to anyone who's interested in fashion, like, just be interested in the world, be curious about everything, because that will only enrich like the way that you tell stories about fashion. Like all of my favorite fashion writers, fashion critics, they have a wealth of knowledge outside of fashion. Maybe they love art, maybe they love, you know, like maybe they were into music, or like, you know, just be curious about the world, because I think it can only enrich the way that you see the world. And I think that developing that point of view outside of like what you think is expected and what you think you should like just figure out what you like. I remember like I recently, this is totally different story, but like I really want to buy art. Like I'm like, that's kind of like, I'm such a cliche. I'm like, okay, now I've like, you know, I can afford to buy my own sofa. Like I also want to buy, like start buying art. And like a friend of mine is an art dealer, and I was like, okay, like who should I be, like where should I be going? Like I need, you know, I have this tiny little budget, like what should I buy? She's just like, buy what you like buy what you like figure out what you like what draws your eye, what interests you. Like don't think of anything, like don't let anyone prescribe anything for you, your taste. Because ultimately, like, you know, beyond having the tools to like tell a story, like learning how to write, learning how to construct a story, right? Like nobody can teach you like your taste. And like I think in the world of fashion journalism, like figuring out what you like and why you like it, and interrogating that and exploring that, and then understanding like why something is the way it is, and sort of being really curious about it, is like what will help you really kind of like find your way. I think that's something I think about a lot, and that's the advice I give people.
That's actually a perfect segue, because we got so many audience questions about how to get started in fashion. Is it okay will I be able to make it in fashion or fashion journalism if I don't study it in school? So that was actually a perfect answer and segue into our audience questions. I think we have time for maybe one or two. So one question, Reno, a junior at Brown, wants to know, in addition to reading and writing regularly, how do you ensure that you're continuously becoming a stronger writer? Do you have any specific practices to strengthen your writing, even though you guys are all such experienced storytellers now? How do you continue to be better?
I feel like you always have to push your media diet further than it is in its confines, right? Like I'm always the one that's like asking my friends to share the thing that they're reading that I might not have seen, or listen to the thing. So just really push your media diet past the silos you've created for yourself. I think that helps.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's really nice about the Times is that it's a newspaper where writing really matters, and, you know, like word choice really matters. And, you know, often you're talking about a particularly constrained amount of words. I mean, you know, it can be anywhere from 500 to, you know, 2000, but usually not more than that. So, you know, you really are, I spent a lot of time thinking about like word choice and structure, and, you know, and you're always making an argument, right? When you're writing something, you have a point and you want your reader to understand that. So like, have you made your point? You know, if you're doing a column, have you made your argument come through? And, you know, is it as vibrant and present as it could possibly be? I think you just have to keep asking yourself those questions.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Chioma, do you have anything else to add on to that? Any writing tips?
No, I think reading always. And yeah, and sometimes that can be, you know, making sure that you're, or, you know, I mean, that sort of sense of rigor, like that'll to give framework to your ideas, I think is really important, just as Vanessa was saying, because if your argument is lost in words, then, you know, then you haven't done the job correctly. Because I think, you know, what I find with a lot of younger writers, they get very sort of, the sort of message gets lost in the words, or the story gets lost. And, you know, sometimes actually stripping back and paring back and finding, you know, that to me it's always like maybe one less word. Also word choice obviously is really important, but maybe stripping back, like how can we make this message like really clear?
I mean, it's actually one of the weirdest things I think about the US, especially having worked in the UK for 12 years, which both Samantha and Chioma can speak to, is that like here people tend to want you to be a writer or an editor. And in the UK, generally you do both. And in fact, I think those are two incredibly complementary skill sets, because if you are an editor, you do understand much more about structuring, and you are much tougher with yourself as a writer when you're like, I know I really like this beautiful sentence that I've written that is so like lyrical and rhapsodic, but if I take it out, my story will be so much better.
Mhm.
You can actually like be tough with yourself and take it out. And if you're an editor, when you're a writer, you understand that kind of structure in a much more direct way. So I do think like being able to do both things is incredibly useful, and it's something that people should sort of encourage more in the US.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
the one thing I will say that I learned, that you will learn on print, is like having to like work to fit, that you won't
It's so annoying.
economy of words and being able to. I remember my first sort of page I got to look after, I guess I got like 30 words per box, right? And sidebars, I just did sidebars endlessly, and it did train, this. I just had to really, my word choice really mattered because I only had 50 words or 30 words to say something. So you do learn, I have to say, that's one thing that you don't get so much when you don't have that training.
I would also, I'd say as well, don't be afraid of voice and humor. Like I get so many writing tests in, and like, I don't know whether they think glamour is earnest, but like it is earnest and it's like straightforward. And the ones that stand out in those writing tests when they're coming is voice or humor or a point of view. And I think don't be afraid of leaning into that, especially early in your career, because that will differentiate you from the crowd.
Mhm.
That is so much trouble about that though at the times when I first got there. Like literally every single exclamation point, any kind of irony, like it was just like everything was a fight.
Yeah.
They've gotten better about it since then.
Sorry to.
No, of course. Go ahead, please go ahead.
I do think in the age of like in the internet age, like voicier, bigger, better, like it's all about that. So it's a weird sort of tightrope between making sure that you. But yeah, I think to differentiate yourself, you sort of do have to, right? It's like.
Definitely.
I also find it very interesting when, and this is just for the students that I'm sure will be looking for jobs in the next year or so, when somebody comes in and they're saying, I'm really interested in this, right? Like I'm really interested in health and wellness, or I'm really interested in, the fashion history of sneakers or something. And then I go and search them on the internet and there's no breadcrumbs of that anywhere. And I think what you guys have that we didn't have, I didn't have when I was in university, I didn't have all these places to put my voice. I didn't have Medium and TikTok and Instagram and all of these different places that when you do go for your first job, that you've already created, and you've started creating this archive digitally of where your interests, your beats, where do you want to be, what do you want to be talking about. And if you don't capitalize on that now, I find it's very hard for me to take you seriously when you walk in the door and you're like, I'm really interested in this, and there is no evidence of that anywhere on the internet, even a Medium post.
Mhm. Absolutely. This has been so helpful because I can't even tell you the number of questions we've gotten about advice with entering this industry or just journalism in general. But unfortunately, I think we've come to our last question. I just was wondering, what would you tell young adults hoping to find success in the fashion editorial industry today? Do you feel hopeful about the future of fashion journalism given all of these changes, and hopeful for the next generation of writers?
I feel hopeful that media jobs are much more flexible than they've ever been, right? You don't have to necessarily go in at the beauty closet to end up being a beauty editor. You don't need to do these very clearly mapped out trajectories. And I also think you've seen this interesting shift where editors have gone to platforms and vice versa. So I think I'm hopeful that the world of media journalism, including fashion journalism, has continued to evolve, that there are opportunities for the right people, even if they haven't done the trajectory that in the past would have been expected from an editor-in-chief or a digital director or, a fashion correspondent. There's different ways in now.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would say also, I think this idea of what editorial is and where it's coming from, it's been now like brands need storytellers. Now brands are building their own content, platforms. They're telling their own stories. They're finding their editorial voice. So I think beyond like the traditional outlets and just think about like, well, what, from what speaks to you, which brands speak to you, because maybe you're not necessarily, you don't have to be locked into this one idea of what a fashion editor is or where a fashion editor works. I think now, like, there's so many different opportunities outside of the sort of the traditional structure of editorial, you know, and I think a lot of I see a lot of brands that are really doing really great work, and they also have like very big budgets, and they can get fun talent and work with fun people. So I wouldn't rule out, you know, look beyond the sort of traditional what you think of a fashion editorial job, because there are lots of, like, the world needs storytellers, like the world needs content creators, and, like, I hate that word, but it is what it is. And I think just think about, like, you know, what kind of stories you want to tell, and what feels comfortable in terms of the medium of telling them, because maybe it's not writing, maybe you want to combine some kind of, you know, video or storytelling, or there's lots of ways, you know. I think we're thinking much more about how we tell fashion stories outside of a traditional article too. So and that's journalism as well. So, you know, think about that.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, jobs are being created every day that didn't exist a month ago, right? So, you know, like, you guys will graduate and there will be positions that, you know, I couldn't even imagine right now to even tell you to think about. So, you know, as both Chioma and Sam said, there's huge opportunity in unexpected places. And the biggest thing I would say is, like, don't get locked into, you know, exactly what you think you need to be. You know, just be open, which is frankly like a lesson in every part of life. We should be more open, and, you know, and take a risk, you know, because it's not irrevocable. You know, like, make a 3-year plan and you get to, like, revise it every year. You know, just try it and see how it goes. And, you know, it will take you in really unexpected and potentially fantastic places.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all of your insight and sharing so much about your experience. Thank you so much, Vanessa, Chioma, and Samantha, for joining this evening. It has been such an honor and such a privilege. And thank you so much to everyone in the audience who has joined us this evening. We hope to see you at one of our other wonderful Brown Fashion Week events this week. And so goodbye for now, and have a lovely evening. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.